You stand in a yellow fog on a London street in 1858, watching it curl around chimneys like something alive. The air tastes of coal, damp brick, and something sour rising from below. Horses leave dark trails on cobblestones, already streaked with waste and ash. Behind lace curtains, respectable families light scented lamps and talk about progress. Out here, the smell of that progress feels almost unbearable. You pull a handkerchief over your nose, but it does almost nothing. Everyone says the Victorians were obsessed with cleanliness and propriety. And yet, the city around you feels like it is rotting in slow motion. Somewhere beneath your feet, the real story of Victorian hygiene is fermenting. Victorian England liked to see itself as polished and disciplined, divided between the disciplined drawing rooms of the West End and the crowded alleys of the East. On paper, it was the age of railways, scientific lectures, and domestic order. In reality, hygiene was a constant negotiation between money, belief, and basic survival. The wealthy spoke of cleanliness as a moral duty and social marker. The poor treated it as a fragile luxury that could vanish with one missed wage. Doctors argued over whether too much washing could weaken the body. Preachers told crowded congregations that cleanliness is next to godliness. Behind every elegant slogan stood a family fighting damp, disease, and dirt. Victorian hygiene was less a habit and more a battlefield. You climb a narrow staircase in a London tenement, your hand sliding over a banister sticky with old polish and fresh grime. On the top floor, a family crowds around a single tin tub. Selfish steam fills the room, fighting the cold that seeps through the thin walls. The father steps in first, his shoulders sinking under the week's exhaustion. When he leaves, the mother takes his place in the same cloudy water. Children wait in order, fidgeting as the surface turns from gray to almost black. By the time the youngest is lowered in, the water is more memory than liquid. The phrase, "Don't throw the baby out with the bathwater," suddenly feels less like a joke. Here, hygiene is a rota, a sacrifice, and an act of hope. For working families, water itself could be an enemy as much as a friend. Running water was rare for days. Public bathhouses promised a solution, but even a penny could feel expensive. When they opened in cities like Liverpool and Manchester, they quickly became more than plumbing. Men and women lined up not just to bathe, but to talk. News, rumors, and advice on work or illness moved faster than the steam. Clean skin and a clean shirt could help someone keep a fragile job. A visit to the baths could mean the difference between respectable and suspicious. In these tiled rooms, communities tried to wash away the city's judgment. Now, step through the polished doorway of a townhouse in Belgravia, where gas lamps cast a honeyed glow on marble floors. Upstairs, a copper bath waits inside a dedicated room, warmed before dawn. Servants carry bucket after bucket of heated water from the kitchen below. The lady of the house sinks into rose-scented water, watched by a maid. Her linens are fresh, her towels soft, and her robe carefully warmed. Outside, children share one cracked basin between 6 people. Inside, the ritual of bathing is almost a performance of status. The water does not simply remove dirt, it confirms her place in society. In Victorian London, the distance between 2 bathtubs could span an entire world. At the very top of this hierarchy stood the royal household itself. Queen Victoria's modern bathroom at Windsor Castle became a symbol of progress. It boasted marble fittings, a flush system, and an early shower mechanism. Pulling a chain released a cascade of water that felt almost magical. Visitors wrote about it as if describing a scientific wonder, not simple hygiene. Yet even in palaces, the technology was experimental and temperamental. Pipes rattled, drains gurgled, and servants constantly worried about leaks and smells. What looked like effortless luxury rested on invisible labor and fragile systems. Victorian cleanliness always depended on someone else quietly carrying the buckets. You pick up a bar of early Victorian soap and feel its rough weight in your hand. It smells faintly of tallow, lye, and a forced idea of purity. When rubbed on skin, it scours rather than caresses, leaving redness behind. Women note cracked hands in letters, but still praise the feeling of being properly clean. Then, slowly, the advertisements begin. Posters show angelic children and glowing faces, promising gentleness and refinement. Names like pears and sunlight turn harsh chemistry into dreams of softness. You are not just buying soap anymore. You are buying a story. Cleanliness becomes something you can imagine, desire, and display on a dressing table. The soap industry learned quickly how to turn necessity into aspiration. Manufacturers experimented with transparent bars, delicate fragrances, and elegant packaging. Celebrity endorsements appeared, with actresses quietly paid to credit their complexions to particular brands. Working families saw these posters even when they could not afford the products. In cramped kitchens, they still relied on home-rendered fat, ash, and caustic soda. Recipes promised thrift, but carried real danger, from burns to ruined laundry. Children learned early to stand back when lye was poured into the pot. Every bar of soap carried a story of risk, labor, and longing. Cleanliness was no longer just survival. It had become advertising's favorite promise. Fastball, you run your fingers along a crisp white collar hanging to dry beside a narrow window. It looks fresh and honest, a small rectangle of purity in a gray room. Yet the shirt it attaches to has not been washed in weeks. Detachable collars and cuffs let clerks and office workers fake constant freshness. A clean edge around the neck could protect a man from suspicion at work. Behind that neat line of fabric, sweat and worry still soaked the unseen cloth. For women, layered garments trapped heat and humidity under heavy skirts and stays. Undergarments carried the burden of actual contact with the body, then were vigorously scrubbed. Respectability often depended on what you chose to let the world see. Victorian fashion advisors quietly admitted what modern viewers might find shocking. Dresses could last 20 years if carefully aired and never fully washed. Silks and wools were brushed, beaten, and hung near open windows instead. Stains were dabbed at with vinegar or spirits rather than soaked away. Airing dirty laundry began as a literal practice, garments fluttering in modest backyards. Soon the phrase slipped into metaphor, warning against revealing private troubles in public. Clothes became a second skin that absorbed not only sweat but secrets. A careful housekeeper knew which stains to confess and which to conceal. Hygiene and reputation were both managed in quiet, repetitive domestic performances. You sit before a small mirror, staring at hair that feels heavy with the week. Hot water for a thorough wash is a rare indulgence, not a habit. Instead, you reach for flour, rice powder, or starch stored in a paper packet. You dust it into your scalp, then brush until the surface looks matte and controlled. The scent is neutral, but at least the shine of oil is hidden. Popular tonics promise miracle growth with ingredients no one fully understands. Some are made with exotic oils. Others smell of something animal and faintly spoiled. Either way, they drip on pillows and stain upholstery. Furniture slowly acquires protective cloths, silent witnesses to fashionable hair care. The same pursuit of beauty pushed some Victorians toward truly dangerous experiments. Face creams laced with arsenic promised pale, smooth skin admired in portraits. Powders containing lead offered an elegant finish with an invisible long-term cost. Adverts praised radiant complexions without mentioning headaches, tremors, or failing health. Doctors sometimes warned, but manufacturers insisted their formulations were scientifically refined. Society columns celebrated women whose beauty routines quietly harmed them. At the dressing table, the line between grooming and self-poisoning grew blurred. Hygiene and beauty were treated as proof of discipline and self-control. Few admitted how often that control was slowly eroding the body beneath the powder. You open a small tin of Victorian tooth powder and feel a faint sweetness rise. Inside is a mixture of chalk, charcoal, and crushed shells ground to dust. You dampen a brush, if you own one, or use a fingertip instead. The powder scrapes across enamel with a faint hiss, polishing and scratching together. For many, this was a luxury. Others relied on salt or simple cloth. Sugar consumption was climbing, but understanding of decay lagged far behind. Advertisements spoke of charming smiles, not invisible damage. Cheaper concoctions sometimes did more harm than good, grinding away protection. A fresh mouth was prized, even when the methods slowly weakened the teeth themselves. Tangled and moralists argued fiercely over how much cleanliness a body should endure. Some physicians warned that too frequent bathing could sap strength and invite illness. They wrote treatises suggesting that robust health might belong to the lightly washed. At the same time, social reformers insisted that dirt encouraged vice and despair. Religious leaders praised clean homes as signs of inner discipline and faith. Women were quietly appointed guardians of both surfaces and souls.
Kissingless floor became proof of moral effort as much as domestic care. Squeezed failure could be read as laziness, sin,
or poor character. Under these expectations, hygiene became another way to judge and be judged. You leave the city behind and walk into a village where the air changes. Coal smoke thins, replaced by the sharper smell of animals and wet soil. Here, rainwater is still collected in barrels and used sparingly for washing. Herbs like rosemary or lavender hang from beams, waiting to scent water and linen. Families follow routines shaped by seasons rather than factory whistles. Clothes dry on hedges, and basins are carried to doorsteps in the sun. Congest ideas from the cities arrive slowly, folded inside newspapers or traveling sermons. Some villagers adopt new soaps or practices. Others distrust anything that smells industrial. Before gal between rural and urban hygiene becomes another quiet fault line in the age. Villages, the wider world's problems seeped in through wells and streams. Contaminated water did not respect property lines or long-standing traditions. As towns grew and new industries arrived, so did waste and strange illnesses. Local healers and clergymen debated causes with the same uncertainty as city doctors. Some blamed bad air drifting from stagnant ponds or crowded graveyards. Others suspected moral decline and overindulgence in drink or food. Few imagined invisible organisms traveling in each cup of water. Villages watched neighbors weaken after outbreaks and buried them with old rituals. The connection between cleanliness, infrastructure, and survival was there, but still unnamed. You stand on Westminster Bridge in the heat of the summer of 1858 and feel your stomach tighten. The Thames no longer smells like a river. It smells like a wound. Windshield, the color of weak tea, carries fragments of waste past the palace walls. Members of Parliament press perfumed cloths to their faces and try to continue speeches. Curtains soaked in disinfectant hang heavy over chamber windows, barely dulling the stench. Newspapers call it the Great Stink, blending shock with unhelpful humor. The city finally realizes that what it has been hiding in drains has come back to speak. For once, the problem is too strong to ignore or disguise. The heart of the empire is forced to confront its own filth. For decades, London had relied on cesspools, leaky pipes, and wishful thinking. Night soil workers climbed into pits no one wanted to acknowledge existed. They hauled away waste with shovels under cover of darkness, breathing poisonous vapors. As flush toilets became fashionable, the volume of water and waste multiplied dramatically. Much of it ended in the same river that supplied drinking water. Outbreaks of cholera swept through crowded districts, killing quickly and without clear explanation. Officials blamed foul smells, convinced that disease floated on the air alone. Only a few voices insisted the danger might be in the water itself. Society that pronounced radical and a science that threats. You walk the streets with a physician who carries a notebook instead of incense. He marks each doorway where illness has struck, building a map of grief. House after house, the pattern tightens around a single public pump. When he proposes removing its handle, officials hesitate, uneasy about such a simple act. Yet after the pump is disabled, new cases begin to fall. The evidence points not to bad air, but to contaminated water shared by hundreds. It is a turning point, even if many refuse to believe it at first. The idea that disease travels through what cannot be seen feels unsettling. Still, the map on the page is difficult to ignore. Engineers like Joseph Bazalgette turned that disturbing realization into bricks, tunnels, and monumental effort. He proposed vast intercepting sewers that would divert waste away from the city's drinking supply. The project required millions of bricks, miles of pipe, and relentless excavation. Workers labored in trenches filled with mud and the memory of older filth. When the system finally connected, London's river slowly began to recover. Cholera outbreaks retreated from areas linked to the new infrastructure. Life expectancy rose almost quietly, as if the city were learning to breathe again. Other cities watched and started their own projects, reshaping streets and underworlds alike. Hygiene was no longer just about soap or sermons. It was about engineering. You step into a Victorian hospital ward and feel the weight of the air before you see the beds. Windows are small, ventilation poor, and the smell of sickness clings to every surface. Doctors move briskly from patient to patient, coats stained from previous procedures. Instruments are wiped on cloth or aprons rather than washed between uses. Surgical skill focuses on speed and boldness, not necessarily cleanliness. Infection is so common after operations that many fear the hospital more than the illness. Maternity wards tell a similar story, with tragic fevers following childbirth. Grief feels routine, woven into the fabric of daily work. The idea that hands themselves might carry death from one bed to another is only beginning to form. Some early reformers tried simple changes that looked almost trivial, but altered outcomes dramatically. They insisted that hands be washed with particular solutions between patients. They ordered fresh linens, better airflow, and regular cleaning of floors and equipment. At first, many colleagues laughed or resisted, offended by the implication they could spread harm. Yet in the wards that followed these new routines, deaths quietly decreased. Elsewhere, microscopic research revealed shapes and movements previously invisible to human eyes. Scientists linked specific organisms to specific diseases, building a new understanding of contagion. Surgery and childbirth slowly shifted from desperate gambles toward controlled risks.
Hygiene was being rewritten from superstition and habit into procedure and protocol. You return to an ordinary Victorian street near the end of the century and notice subtle changes. There is still coal dust on windowsills, but drains smell less aggressive. Pipes snake into houses that once carried only candles and cold. Burglary notices advise residents to boil water or report faulty pumps. Soap is more affordable, and its use encouraged by charities as well as merchants. Posters promote bathhouses, not as luxuries but as tools of public health. New toilets are advertised in catalogs alongside furniture and lamps. A bathroom becomes a room to be shown, not hidden. The language of cleanliness has stretched from private vanity to shared responsibility. Manufacturers and reformers discovered that hygiene could sell not only products, but futures. Factory owners built model villages with clean streets and indoor plumbing to showcase enlightened industry. Women's groups distributed leaflets teaching mothers how to protect children from unseen dangers. Household manuals described step-by-step routines for cleaning bodies, clothes, and rooms. Some advice was rigid and moralizing. Some was genuinely life-saving. Every bar of soap and flush of a toilet carried quiet messages about worth. Commit to be clean was to be modern, respectable, and, increasingly, safe. Yet these advances remained uneven, slower to reach the poorest households and distant colonies. The story of Victorian hygiene was both triumph and unfinished promise. You look back across the century and see a strange, unsettling timeline. A society terrified of filth created inventions that sometimes made its problems worse. An age that feared too much washing produced some of history's most important hygiene reforms. Greenwich superb hands raw while unknowingly drinking contaminated water from trusted sources. Doctors dismissed early warnings yet later adopted new practices that saved thousands of lives. Moral sermons and scientific experiments collided in overcrowded streets and echoing hospital corridors. The Victorians did not move from darkness to light in a straight line. They stumbled, resisted, and argued their way toward cleaner cities and safer care. Their contradictions still linger in how we think about purity, progress, and shame. Contextual, this video is created for educational and historical purposes. It examines themes of power, corruption, and human conflict without depicting explicit or graphic events. You stand again on that London street, now in your own century, watching a river that looks calmer than it once did. Tap water flows easily, hot showers wait at a twist of the wrist, and hospitals feel bright, disinfected, and controlled. It is tempting to believe we are safely beyond Victorian fears and mistakes. Yet invisible threats still travel through systems systems we barely notice, from crowded cities to hospital corridors. We still debate which risks to accept, which warnings to ignore, and who deserves protection first. If this story made you reflect on how fragile that protection can be, stay with us. Subscribe for the next chapter from the darker corners of human history. Because the real question is not whether the Victorians were filthy or enlightened. It is whether we will recognize our own era's hidden dirt before it starts to stink.